Welcome back to Fox 12 Now, here out of the Fox 12 Oregon Newsroom. I'm Greg Nibbler, and if you've been joining us here this afternoon, thanks for doing so. We live stream here every weekday starting at 1 p.m., going all the way through the afternoon. Just always reminding people of that, whether you're watching live or after the fact. Something that we've been covering and talking about are the deaths of gray whales, particularly in the state of Washington, but also Oregon. And we've seen this happen. It's something that does happen every year, but this year seems to be that we're having a lot more. And so we're going to be talking about that right now. We've got John joining us here from Cascadia Research. And John, thank you very much for being here and being part of the show to discuss this with us. I think to start off, if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about yourself and your organization, and then we'll talk about these deaths that have been occurring.
Yes, no, thanks. And really nice to talk to you about this. I'm with Cascadia Research. We're based in Olympia, Washington, and we've been responding to these strandings. And I've been studying gray whales for over 40 years now in the Pacific Northwest, mostly in Washington State, but also off Oregon as well. And our organization, we mostly study live whales, but we do research these strandings of dead whales as well, and that's obviously a little bit more of a challenging setting when we face those.
Now, in an ordinary situation, an ordinary year, is there a general number of gray whales that may wash up onto the coasts of Oregon and Washington?
Yes, well, recent years have been kind of challenging our what is normal, but going back over the last 50 years, it was more 4 to 6 strandings in Washington State was a more typical year. And then we had these periods, like we had one in 1999 and 2000, where we had elevated mortality, and then most recently starting in 2019, so about 7 years ago. And for a while, we were really thinking, okay, maybe some of these elevated mortalities every 10, 15 years might be part of a more normal cycle. And I had even been a co-author on a publication reporting these kind of boom bust cycles. But what's been going on recently that's troubled us is that this higher mortality and kind of crisis gray whales have faced has now been going on about 7 years, since 2019, when we had record numbers of strandings, and we thought that would end. And so what we're seeing this year, 2026, has been particularly troubling in that context, that we were hoping for a rebound, not an increase.
And how much of an increase are we talking about, just to clarify that again?
Yeah, so currently we're at 23 gray whales have washed up dead in Washington State so far this year. As that stands currently, that would be about our third highest total in the last 50 years. But our problem is we're not to the end of May yet. And so this is still early in the year. Our record number of strandings was 2019, where we had 35. So we're still a little short of that. But at the end of April, when we looked at, well, what's our record number through April, then this year was substantially higher than any other year we'd ever seen, including that 2019 year where we had peak numbers. So we were really troubled at the pace we were getting them at through April, early in the year. Fortunately, that slowed down a little bit. Whereas we had 13 strandings in April, we've only had 6 so far in May, though we are investigating a possible 1 or 2 additional ones. So at least the pace of those strandings has slowed a little bit.
Is there any indication let me rephrase that. Is there any indication as to what has been causing this issue and this increase in gray whales being stranded?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's certainly some unknowns, but we definitely have really good ideas about what's going on. And I'll kind of run through that. First of all, we have, what do the whales that we examine look like? And a lot of them are malnourished and very thin, even all the way to kind of emaciated whales. So that's the first sign that we have. The second thing we see is that the gray whales that are dying are primarily the gray whales that go up to the Arctic to feed. We have some other gray whales that come into Puget Sound and feed. They seem to be doing pretty well. We have a group of whales that spend their summer and fall in the Pacific Northwest. We call them the Pacific Coast Feeding Group of whales. They seem to be doing okay. And there are even some gray whales that go to the western North Pacific, and they seem to be doing pretty well. So the commonality in this group that's dying is that they feed in the Arctic. So that combined with these thin, emaciated examinations really points the finger at a food supply issue up in the Arctic, is at the core of this. And there's some research coming out of the Arctic that has shown some of the areas gray whales have commonly fed that used to have these dense beds of amphipods on the bottom, and that's what the gray whales seem to feed on. They're specialized in feeding along the bottom. That prey density had declined dramatically in some of those areas.
So is this causing these whales to come down into areas where they're not normally, residing because of that lack of food?
Yes, we've sort of seen a combination of things there. We're seeing a lot more gray whales searching for alternate areas to feed, and we're seeing that out on the Washington outer coast. We're seeing that in some gray whales that are coming into Puget Sound. And we think that's driven by a combination of kind of a search for alternate areas to feed because the Arctic feeding areas aren't as good. But then we've also, and one thing that kicked this off in early April was a gray whale that swam far up the Willapa River in early April and then ended up dying up that river. And that's that photo actually that's showing right now. And we think that actually represents whales that are in such a debilitated state that they're starting to lose some of their faculties and ability to navigate. And so more than just exploring new areas or trying to find search for new areas, this represents whales now really in a poor condition where they can't really navigate correctly and end up in these really strange locations.
So moving into more of like a mental distress kind of situation.
Yes. And that's why with that whale up the Willapa River, when whales end up in these really strange areas like this, we do evaluate, is this a situation that we ought to try to rescue the whale or try to encourage it to leave the area? But kind of the first step in that evaluation is the whale healthy enough that it would survive if it was not in that unusual habitat? Otherwise you might be just taking a whale that's already stressed out and dying and just adding to that stress, if you will. And we determined in that case that this would have been a whale that, we trying to do those kind of measures would not have been helpful to the whale.
From a scientific standpoint, if it does seem that a lot of this is food related from these whales in the Arctic, is there any kind of indication as far as this a rare, instance in the environment? Is this human caused, or as far as what's causing that shortage?
Yes, and this is maybe a place that, maybe I can even just say my own thinking has evolved and changed because when we were first seeing some of these mortality events, going back, 20, 30 years ago, we started to think, okay, maybe this is part of a little bit of one of the papers we called boom bust cycles in whales. And I was more reluctant to look at things like climate change as a factor because the whales had recovered, had come back to higher numbers since whaling, and maybe they were experiencing more normal fluctuations in prey abundance. But now we've seen this go on so many years, and the estimates of the gray whale population are now 50% lower than they were just 10 years ago. So that's a huge decline. And that doesn't suggest just kind of fluctuations in the carrying capacity of whales, but more dramatic changes in the availability of prey. And the Arctic is an area that has been heavily affected by ecosystem changes related to climate change, more so than other parts of the globe. And we've seen a steady receding, ice cover up in those areas that seems to have affected current patterns up there. The water temperature along the bottom where these amphipod prey of gray whales grow is substantially warmer now. So you have all of these patterns kind of driven by these ecosystem changes that we think at the heart is climate change and part of global warming, things that we as humans are responsible for. And it's one of the reasons why I've been, troubled to see the U.S. take such a huge step backwards, in the last year and a half, 2 years, from being a leader in trying to combat climate change to now, denying its existence or downplaying its consequences. And we think with these gray whales, we're getting that early warning. No, this can have dire consequences in some of these areas where, that maybe are on the forefront of being impacted by that climate change.
Yeah, from the scientific standpoint, right there, looking at these whales, washing up. When it, I guess what happens now from, the science standpoint is just to continue to study what happens. Do you anticipate that there's going to be more here throughout the rest of this year?
Unfortunately, even in Washington State and in the Pacific Northwest, we usually see the high mortality extending through the end of June. So we still have a while to go to even get through the typical peak period of mortality. We're hoping maybe with this slight decrease in the rate of strandings that maybe things just occurred a little bit earlier this year, and we won't see that extend all the way through June. I will say there's a high level of collaboration and cooperation among scientists triggered by this mortality event, especially once it started in 2019. So on a monthly basis, there's a coordinating call between scientists in Mexico, California, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, and up into Alaska, comparing what we're seeing. There's a planned, scientific symposium and workshop in September to investigate this. There's an event tonight being organized in British Columbia on the plight of gray whales that I'll be speaking at. So you're seeing a lot more collaboration among scientists, engagement with the public, trying to get the word out and investigating this as much as possible.
When it comes to the public side of things, what is the best thing or what is something that they can do to help contribute to this research, or even if they do come across a gray whale, to get that information to the correct authorities?
Yes, no, there's a variety of things. If you see a whale either floating or on the beach, we do at the CascadiaResearch.org website have a live table of all the strandings we know about and the results of our investigation and results of that. You can check on that to see if where you've seen the whale is one of the areas we've already documented, or if it appears new, please reach out. You can reach out to really any local authority or police or Coast Guard. NOAA has a stranding hotline that you can also look up to call in. That's what ends up triggering and notifying groups like ours that go out to investigate those strandings. So that's one thing. And I do think, we're fortunate here in the Pacific Northwest to have, gray whales that are being successful, off Oregon, off Depot Bay and Newport. There's whale watching for some of these, what we call the Pacific Coast Feeding Group of gray whales. In Puget Sound, we have these sounders gray whales that feed. I think one thing we can do is try to ensure those are protected from things like entanglement or vessel strikes. So those surviving gray whales that are feeding in other areas, have a positive area to feed and can do well. And then, thirdly, I would say, whatever you can do, talking to your family, your friends, especially if they're ones that don't believe climate change is real, trying to reach out to them that no, we're seeing some real consequences of this now. We're not talking about 10 years from now, a few inches of sea level rise. We're talking about a real effect on animals that we care and love.
Right now when that's happening. Well, John, thank you very much for joining us, to walk through this with everybody and share your experience and the science here behind this, and just what's going on. And hopefully, as you mentioned, that was the peak already, but we'll continue to follow this. And thanks for all the hard work and research that you do, and being here on Fox 12 Now. Thanks so much.
Yes, absolutely. And CascadiaResearch.org, you can get more information, our reports and publications. If you want to donate to support this kind of research, that's available there as well.
All right, John, thank you. I appreciate it.
Nice seductive.
And for everybody watching, this is Fox 12 Now, as I mentioned, so you can feel free to share this segment as well. You'll be able to see this on the Fox 12 Oregon app or on YouTube, wherever you're finding it. Thanks for doing so. We're going to continue on here, though. If you're watching live, that's the best way to do it, because we've got more for you. But we are going to take a quick break. Back here in a couple of minutes with more Fox 12 Now.